Over the years, those who have a long relationship with our congregation or our denomination know that our denomination's name is long. It's a mouthful. The Evangelical Congregational Church. So typically we just shorten it to EC if we use it at all. Well, that has given us the opportunity to take those letters, that acronym EC, and make it stand for some other things, like eating constantly. We have joked that we are a denomination of people or individual churches where we are just eating constantly, and for good reason. Here at Faith Church, we've had so many fellowship meals. It could be our practice of having family and community night meals, funeral meals. We have a fellowship time every single Sunday between worship and our classes. That involves food. Our home groups involve food. There are all kinds of other reasons. We don't need to work too hard to find a reason to have a meal together. Even our events have hot dogs and popcorn or something like that. As we continue our study through Surprise the World by Michael Frost, he writes this. He says that eat is the second habit of a highly missional person. Now, that first habit was bless. Maybe you thought, and I hope you thought to yourself, that blessing other people is very doable, and it is. Well, this one should be easy as pie, a cakewalk. Literally, we all eat. Could be 2 meals a day, 3 meals a day, snacks in between. So it does make you wonder, why would Frost say that we need to make a habit out of something that we're going to do anyway? Well, he points out on pages 41 and 42 that the early Christians, way back 2,000 years ago, were known to practice something called the love feast. If you've ever been around brethren Christians, you might have observed them utilizing this practice, the love feast. They still do it today. Well, in the ancient church, the love feast was more than the Lord's Supper. It could include that, of course, but oftentimes the two were separated, where you would have a gathering for the Lord's Supper, but a separate gathering around tables to share a meal together, the love feast. For example, in Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47, Luke tells us the earliest Christians gathered this way. Here's what he says. All the believers were together and had everything in common. Selling their possessions and goods, they gave to anyone as he had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. So why did the early church have this vibrant practice of gathering together to fellowship and eat food in homes? They were just doing what Jesus himself demonstrated for them. If you skim through the 4 Gospels, you cannot miss this. Jesus was eating constantly. He would eat with his disciples, with his other friends, with tax collectors and the so-called sinners. He would eat with the Pharisees, the religious leaders. To the point where in Luke 7:34, Jesus reveals that some people had called him a glutton and a drunkard. Now, he was neither of those things, of course, but he was labeled with those terms because he was frequently seen partying with others, gathering around tables, eating, drinking, sharing life together. That practice of eating, Frost tells us, was not only eating sacramentally, as in the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, or communion. It was eating missionally, as a way to express love to all. So we can totally redefine our practice of eating as a missional habit. In fact, Frost says that this ought to be the primary symbol of Christianity. Typically, what do we think of as the primary symbol of Christianity? The cross, right? And that's a good one, for good, very good reason. What about the table, he says? It's around tables that we share our lives, discuss our feelings, we encourage one another. And so I encourage you to not only read this chapter in Surprise the World, but I'd like to recommend another book, and that is From Tablet to Table by Leonard Sweet. The subtitle is Where Community is Found and Identity is Formed. Both Frost and Sweet are saying the same thing, that fellowship and formation so often happen around tables when we gather and eat together with others. So, what does that look like for your family? You gather around tables, put the phones away, and look one another in the eye and talk about your day? It can be hard. As my family has grown older, my kids have slowly left the house, and as they've gotten older, even when they're still in the house, they're busy. They've got sports, work, friends, driver's licenses, and the freedom to schedule things. We've had fewer and fewer of those table gatherings and discussions. Life just moves at a frantic pace sometimes. But we have to admit, often it's our choice to allow it to move that way. We can feel like we have precious little time to connect, and yet what Frost and Sweet encourage us to do is examine our choices. Could we make different choices? Could we develop new habits around tables, gathering together? Frost suggests this: foster the habit of eating with 3 people each week and talk. Could be 3 at the same time, could be 3 different meals. Now, he cautions us as well about this. There are ways that we should and should not practice the habit of table fellowship. For example, in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 17 through 22, the Apostle Paul is writing the Corinthian church, and he is not happy about how they are practicing their table fellowship. Guests were ranked in order of importance, following Roman custom. Certain people were being left out, others appearing to eat in cliques, rather than gathering together as the whole body of believers. Now, Paul responds to this by writing words that I normally read to our congregation right before we take communion once a month. Paul says we ought to examine ourselves before we eat, so that we can eat in a manner worthy of God. He goes on to talk about this in 1 Corinthians 11, verses 23 through 28. And so Frost writes that done right, the habitual practice of the love feast was to be an incubator in which Christians learn to accept the outsider, offer generosity to the poor, and have fellowship with those of so-called lower rank. As Paul himself will write in verses 33 and 34, so then, my brothers and sisters, when you gather to eat, you should all eat together. Anyone who is hungry should eat something at home, so that when you meet together, it may not result in judgment. The emphasis is togetherness, love, unity, not on the gobbling up of food. And so we make the practice of eating missionally, eating as a missional habit, by opening our tables to people in our churches, in our communities, in our neighborhoods. Years ago, our former EC Bishop Bruce Hill told us a story that his neighborhood was about to have a block party, and he found out that they were going to serve alcohol. The people in the community knew that he was a minister. What should he do? He decided to go anyway. He decided to sit around the tables with people and build relationship. He was practicing a missional habit. He knew that that's what Jesus would have done, because that's what Jesus actually did many times. Sit around tables, seek to build relationships. So Frost writes, don't judge the lifestyles of eating or drinking habits of your host. See the opportunity as a gold mine for missional relationship building. And so Frost concludes this chapter very much in the same way he concluded the previous one about blessing others. Eat with 3 people this week, at least one of whom is not a member of your church. So who will you eat with this week? And then what about next week? How will you turn these habits of blessing and eating into habits that are missional, that you do every week?